Today's youth need teachers, volunteers, and most of all, well, they need you. I'm Doug Edwards, and I'm going to be talking with real youth mentors and students to give you the knowledge you need to be the best youth worker possible. This is Youth Worker on Fire. Hi, Youth Worker Nation. This is Doug Edwards, and I'm with Youth Worker on Fire, and we're here today with Bryan Totten. I know that you are a great teacher, and at least that's the rumor.
That's the rumor.
It's been out there.
I'm not going to confirm or deny on that.
That's right. And you just spoke at Baccalaureate for this senior class.
Yes, sir.
You started teaching with these guys when they were sixth grade.
Yeah, 2011.
Parents wanted you to speak because obviously you had a place in your kids' lives.
It's been a really cool experience, and I think it's one of the cool things about teaching in a small town is that, here I started in Umatilla, 2010-11 school year, had this group, and, because, the middle school is literally like 50 yards behind the high school, I've been able to keep in touch with a lot of these guys, and so I've been able to track with them and kind of watch them continue to grow up, and this year I had the opportunity to transition from the middle school to come teach at the high school, and all of that just felt right. So I'm happy to be here and see them out into the world.
Yeah, and some people now work in youth ministry, of course, and that's what I did for most of my career. One dynamic that they say in that realm is that if we could start volunteers with sixth graders and let them follow them all the way through graduation, that's a good dynamic. It's not the only dynamic, but you're actually getting to live out that dynamic in the school system. Before we go on to that, give us your life story, just in a short synopsis, and where you are to date.
Grew up here in Eustis, went to Faith Lutheran from preschool on through 8th grade, and transitioned over to Eustis High. Was not a model student at Eustis. I think I was a 2.1 GPA after my sophomore year.
Yeah.
Finally, had a teacher that one day in class, it really influenced me, and I said, hey, I like what he's doing. I want to do that, I think. And so junior, senior year, turned things around, but still I wasn't, able to go straight out to university. So went to Lake Sumter, loved my 2 years there. I thought it was just a wonderful experience, and went from Lake Sumter to UCF, changed majors half a dozen times, and towards the end decided no, I really do want to go into education. I do want to work with students.
I think that it's a healthy thing that students get to change their majors sometimes.
Yeah.
Because most of us don't know what we want to do, even when we think we know what we want to do.
Yeah, and when I went into Lake Sumter, I went in as an education major. Mm-hmm. I was like, I know this is what I want to do. And I took intro to education. I was like, man, I hate this class. I don't want to do that. So I remember I asked the teacher, I said, hey, are you telling me that I don't have to have a degree in education to be a teacher? And she got hesitant. She's like, well, no, you don't have to. I said, okay, thank you. And I withdrew from the class later that day. And I said, I'll find another way in. And so that's what I did.
So what was your other way in? How'd you end up doing that?
Like I said, a bunch of major changes, but I ended up going, when I finished Lake Sumter, my plan was to go to UCF and double major in public administration and English. I quickly dropped the English and continued majoring in public administration, then switched over from public administration to psychology because I love just the personal social aspect, trying to kind of get into people's minds a little bit, figure out what makes us all tick. I figured out I didn't want to go through another more 4 years of school after the psychology to really get into that. So switched the major back to public administration because I could get out quicker. Yeah. So I ended up majoring in public administration, minoring in psychology. Knew I didn't directly want to do either of those. So my final year, I finished in December. In that fall, I started substitute teaching because I knew, all right, I need to get into the school system somehow. I don't have the degree. I need some kind of experience and some contacts in the system to, let people know hey, but I can do this job. So that was my bridge in, was substituting.
Once you substituted, Now, what did you have to do to stay into teaching?
I started subbing. For me, I was like, all right, knowing that I'm not coming in with a degree, I want to try to make sure I'm as credentialed as possible. So I went and took the subject area test that I needed to take. So I took the social studies subject area, I took the GKT, I took the professional educator certification test, and I was just studying so that I could be in a position where I could apply and say, look, I don't have the degree, but I've got this test taken, this certification's ready, all of that, I'm good to go.
Many people in leadership and in entrepreneurism, they would say you did it the better way. They say usually getting certifications are better than degrees in the long term and short term of it, because degrees cost a whole lot of money when most of the time what you needed was a certification on almost any area of life.
Right. And with education, you do need both. Right? You've got to have the 4-year to even be considered.
Right.
You have that first year. You can get hired with just a 4-year in Florida, and then you've got that year to knock out those tests. So there's teachers that they'll get hired as a teacher that first year, and they can't pass that certification test. They're in a tough spot at the end of that first year because they don't know if they can be hired back again.
Okay. So there are some leniencies there if they really like them, if they see some potential.
Yeah, the first year, yes. After that, I think it gets a little trickier if you haven't passed those certifications.
You and I were talking about going into full-time ministry, student ministry, or pastor, something.
Sure.
So tell me about that dynamic and how that relates to here.
Yeah. Well, for me at that time, I was second, third year teacher, and I was teaching social studies, and I was just kind of frustrated with the curriculum and the system and all those things that you hear. I knew I still wanted to work with kids. So I'd talked to my local youth pastors, and I said, I'm really thinking about this. But the thing I could never quite let go of was the opportunity and time actually around the students. What I noticed was at the church, it's, Wednesday night and it's Sunday morning. And if you can catch a spot in between, then you get to spend some time. But, if you're at a larger sized church, that youth group's going to be 50, 60 kids, and you're there with them for an hour. You're not getting a whole lot of actual time to work with each kid. I couldn't quite give up that, but I get to be around these students 5 days a week through the ups and the downs and all the craziness that might walk in from day to day. I mean, who knows what life's just thrown at these guys. So for me, that helped to keep me in the classroom. And then I was offered the opportunity to take over the AVID program at the middle school. And AVID's just awesome. It functions a lot like a youth group. It's not as curriculum structured in the same way as a core content class would be.
And for people who don't understand what AVID is, explain AVID.
Yeah, so AVID stands for Advancement via Individual Determination. The program's been around for 30 some odd years. And the whole purpose and meaning behind the program is to help kids that are academically in the middle, first-generation college students, their parents haven't walked through this college process, and to kind of create structure and study support and push them up into some upper-level classes so that they can have an opportunity to get into college that they might not otherwise have. And
you're staying with a lot of these students year after year, is that right?
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. My freshmen that I have this year, I was their AVID teacher 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So, if all goes well here, I'll be able to track with them 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, and actually get 7 years with this group of kids.
Yeah, that's a big deal. These are formative years. We have different types of formative years from birth, but middle school, I tell middle school students, I tell volunteer workers, probably what you thought of loving in life in middle school, what you thought about doing, is probably what you should do.
It's interesting you say that. I think I was in 7th grade. I'm honest, the 7th grade, the first time I just remember sitting back and thinking, whatever I do in my life, I just want to work with people. I want to help people kind of through their ups and downs. So for a while I thought that might be psychologist or something like that. But, over time it's been pretty clearly no, in the classroom. So yeah, for me that happened right around that time. That's been a desire that was just like you said, in middle school.
That was a real eye-opener for me, because growing up, and most of us, if we don't have a place to know that, someone's taught that, you've read that somewhere, your thought is what you've learned by the time Hard Knocks hits and you're in high school, or you're past that 13, 14-year-old age. Now things get tougher, and your cognitive level is different, and now you're hearing the pain of, oh, you can't do that, oh, you're not good enough for that, and so you back off of the very dreams you have, because before that you thought, well, I can do anything. Now, because of the environment around you, you're being told, no, you really can't, that was all a lie.
Yeah, the pressures and the doubts can be pretty intense, especially when you get up into that high school level, and that's definitely something that AVID is there to try to help kids walk through. Mm-hmm. Right, so this is why we do some of the projects that we do on different careers, and really try to hammer in that no, that hope is still there. Don't let your dreams be crushed yet. There's a chance. Yeah. We can help you get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we did that with our own children, Ryan and Chris and Holly. Ryan is a recording artist now, because we knew that was a real thing. Yeah. We saw his talent because we were on that arts end. Thank God my wife is both art and business. She's got both sides of the brain working. That other side of the brain for me is just not even working. It's not even there. So, but we encouraged them in that way, because we taught that, we read that, we studied. We saw that in our own kids, that's happening. And you're getting to teach that. And there's somewhere in the educational system, they understand that.
Yeah, it's tough, because there's, I would say that, I don't know if it's the minority, but there are so many students that do not get that experience at all. Mm-hmm. As you know, that they don't have a family structure that is there to say, oh, you're good at this, let me help mold you this direction, mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a number of students that get the opposite from home. It can be a tough situation where you're trying to encourage students and like, hey, you can do this, and their whole life they've heard the exact opposite. Mm-hmm. So it's it's a blessing to get to work with both students, and the cool thing about AVID is you get a mix of both of those students in there, where you've got kids out of tough homes, kids out of good homes, and we're able to really kind of come together as a unit and say that, hey, we as this AVID group, we're nurturing this mentality.
Yes.
This is how, we're going to see the world, that this is a world of opportunity, and we're going to help each other get there and grow there.
Tell me about your worst teaching moment. Everybody relates with their worst more than they do with their best. We'll get to the best. Yeah. Tell me about your worst.
Worst teaching moment. All right. Yep. It was my third year teaching, and I had this student who I'd really been like trying to form that bond with, and I couldn't quite get there. And she was just kind of standoffish. She was a good student, but she and I it was rough. I don't know. Mm-hmm. And one day we had a conversation, and she finally kind of opened up a little bit, and I'm like, okay, cool, this is going well. So the next day in class, she said something, and I guess I was just having a bad day. I don't know what was going on. I was hungry maybe. And, I said something, and she jokingly challenged me. And I said, step outside. I said, get out of the classroom right now. And this kid had never been sent out of class in her life.
Oh.
Great student, great kid. And you could just see it on her face. It crushed her. And for a couple of years, she would still bring that up as a very sore spot in her life. And for me, I felt terrible, because I was like, what did I just do? I was finally getting there, and then I blew it, and I'm like, no, you get out of class. This kid, she's never done anything wrong.
Then how do you back down as a teacher? Because
right.
You got a whole dynamic now.
Oh, yeah, and the whole
classroom control.
Yeah, and they're all looking at you like, why did you do that? She's a good kid, So yeah, that's one moment for me that just sticks out as what a bonehead move. Why did I do that?
And you know what? We've all had those moves. And I believe many times it's with some of the very students we so want to have an impression on.
Yeah.
We so have worked on that relationship, and inevitably, just in my experience, that's the relationship that we will blow somewhere along the way.
Yeah.
That's the relationship that will just, fall apart at some point, and it's like, oh, I put so much time in it. I did so,
Right. Yeah, fortunately, she's forgiven me and moved on. Right, and
Good, because I have some
Yeah.
students who haven't forgiven me yet. There's hope.
Yes, absolutely.
What's your best moment? Best teaching moment?
That's really tough, and I want to say I've been blessed with a lot of great moments over the last couple of years.
Give me one or two that just kind of pop to your mind. They don't have to be the best then, but some of the best.
First one that comes up, and I'll say it's one of the best because it was one of the first like this for me, and it sort of changed the way I approached students. So it was my second year teaching, and I was teaching history, and I had one student that was a little bit of a trouble student. Could be very kind of slyly combative and just didn't want to go with the flow on anything. And we were taking our exam, and something had happened to where she had left. She told me she had left her mechanical pencil in another classroom. And I said, I don't care. Take the test now, And she said, no, but I need that mechanical pencil. I said, you're not going to get that mechanical pencil. Here, I'll give you a wood pencil. I don't like wood pencils. So just this whole like back and forth little chess game that she's playing. And I said, no, here's a pencil. You can use that. You're fine. And I went and I sat back at my desk. And she just stubbornly just sat at her desk in the front of her row and just did nothing. And she just sat there. So I let her do that for a couple minutes. And I got up and I walked around. And she had taken the pencil and she just pushed it off her desk onto the floor. And I walked up in front of her, bent down, I picked up the pencil and I set it on her desk, and I just stood there in front of her and I just smiled at her. And she was looking down at the pencil and she looked up at me, and I just sat there and smiled. She looked down again and she looked up at me one more time, and a tear just like dropped out of her eye and she started crying. And she said, can I go to the bathroom? And I said, yeah. And she got up and she walked out and she just went to the bathroom.
Wow.
And so I waited it out, and she came back, and I chatted with her outside. It was in that moment that, in the conversation I had out there, I was like, look, man, I care about you as a student, and I care about you more than you're willing to piss me off. Like, I'm willing to be more patient than that. And for me, everything just sort of clicked in that moment that said, all right, so there are these kids. There's a number of kids that are just going to test to see how much you mean it. Like, where's the boundary line? How far will you let me push before you give up on me? And for me, that was just probably just one of the clearest illustrations. And I just felt like I got it that day. That there's these students that, no, the boundary is a test for how much you care. So that's been formative for me. It completely, I don't want to say changed the way I approach students, but gave me a much better understanding of how and why.
One thing that was an interesting lesson for me, and had I not been in student ministry or worked with educators and different ones like that, I wouldn't have gotten it. And that was that students actually love boundaries.
Yes.
They don't even necessarily know that they love boundaries, but they know what it's like not to have them. And they know that they perform better intuitively when they have them.
Yeah, and I've found that to be the case absolutely as well. As much as they rebel against the boundaries, when they're there, I find that they talk more highly of the teachers that have them and fix those boundaries in a firm and loving way, but have fixed boundaries rather than in classroom situations where they feel like anything goes. There's no direction. They don't know what to do.
Right. That is a big deal. There are teachers who go that way. Number one, in the short term, it's easier.
Sure.
In the long term, not only is it harder for the student, but it's harder for the teacher.
Yes.
Harder for the youth worker, by the way, if they're in Churchville,
Sure.
or FCA or whatever, because number one, these guys are looking for guidance, and they're not at the age that they cannot have free reign yet because they don't have enough yet to have free reign. And I call it a point of reference. They don't have enough point of reference to go from.
Yeah, and I'll bring this back again to AVID because it's what I do 5 days a week here.
Right.
One of the spots that really highlights for that, anytime we have visitors come in, I want them to come in on a day when we're doing tutorials. So that's every Tuesday and Thursday. The kids, there's a fixed structure to it, right? There's groups of 6 or 7 rotating, taking turns, going up to a whiteboard, taking a question that they brought into the class. Mm-hmm. There's a format to it. There's kind of a formality to it. There's a way that it's done. And with that structure there, you can see the ease, once the kids understand the structure, how it flows, how this whole thing works, the ease with which they're able to do it. They're comfortable in it. Like they know what they need to do, and they know their job, they know their role, and they're able to help themselves and help each other. And so, they can move freely within that area, and it's so productive. It works.
I'm not so sure that most adults aren't that way too, that we don't have that freedom to actually have that structure, except that I've seen it with adults in the military that will go in and genius people. I'm not talking people that don't have a brain. I'm talking some of these guys, absolute genius, and they would get out and their lives would fall apart because they didn't understand. It was not in their tool shed to have the tools to be able to govern themselves.
Sure. And, I think you see similar things that'll happen even with prisoners. Once they've been incarcerated for so long that they're so used to a set structure that when that structure is not in place for them, they're not able to function.
How do you handle an abstract world?
Right. And so what we're ultimately trying to do is, we don't want that for our students. We don't want them to be so used to somebody else creating a structure that they can't function, but we want to be able to show them like, hey, here are these general structures of how to learn, how to question, how to do this. And we're going to practice that in here so that you can take this structure out with you anywhere.
Well, I'm going to guess that in this program, they may come out with more of those skills than people with a lot higher GPA, but who have not had this program.
Yeah.
Not had this structured training.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. Certainly when it comes to some of the study skills, the note-taking, just the actual act and process of knowing how to learn. That's what we really try to embed in them. And then beyond that, especially once we get to junior and senior year, the actual process of how to get to college, how to navigate that whole milieu of options. By the time they get to their senior year, they've already got lists of college that they're planning to apply for. They've got deadlines and all that ready. Yeah. And there's a lot of seniors that great GPAs, great test scores, still unsure how to navigate where and why.
Yes, yeah, because that was the structure they were used to.
Yep.
And now they have an abstract structure that says, now you are going to have to take what you've learned and go out and reapply it in a way you've never applied before.
Sure.
Now do it.
Yeah. It's not a lot of fun.
No, this is why a lot of students they'll go party in their freshman year. Yeah. All year they'll end up, losing their scholarships or whatever. And those first 2 years are very crucial. And the first year is absolutely essential to be able to navigate through.
Absolutely.
Because your world is different.
Yeah. And again, that's we try to give them everything we can so that when they get there, again, there's something that they have to fall back on.
Yes.
We don't want them to leave this place, especially in the AVID program, but at any high school, the hope is that they don't just leave here and they find themselves just, grasping for anything in sight once they get to college because, they don't know what to do. We want them to be formed enough to be able to walk in any classroom and say, I may not know this subject, but I know how to learn this subject.
Yes. I know how to go through the steps,
Yeah.
the process that will apply in almost any situation.
Yeah.
You can get through almost anything if there is a step-by-step process that you've learned, and most people don't have those.
Right. Something that we teach is a concept called growth mindset. Basically, it breaks the mindsets down into two different things. You got fixed mindset, which basically says, I'm good at what I'm good at because I'm innately good at it, and that's it. I'm bad at math because I'm bad at math. I've always been bad at math, right? The growth mindset is the exact opposite. It says, yeah, I might be bad at math now, but I just don't get it yet, right? And it's a fundamentally different approach. It's that, no, I have the ability and capacity to learn. I may not be Einstein.
But that was the Einstein problem. Einstein was a perfect example of how that is possible. He was terrible. They thought he was an idiot.
Right.
But in time.
Yeah, in time. Just that persistent willingness to engage the problem, right? To say, all right, I might fail at it once, twice, 3, 4 times, but I'm going to consistently look at what I'm doing wrong and figure out the puzzle pieces. I know I can get it eventually.
That's why guys who are, and I'll say, I never can say it right, dyslexic, is that how you say it? That's how those guys, sometimes they become great leaders in the world.
Yes.
They become great thinkers, and people with all kinds of learning, reading disabilities are able to overcome.
Yeah, well, they understand struggle. They've never had a time where they weren't struggling to learn. Yeah. So when they get out into the real world and it's like, oh, you have to struggle out here too. Oh, fine. I've done that all my life.
That's right. Now I get that.
Yeah. Whereas, the student that's always been so, I'm the straight A student, this comes easy to me. When they hit that struggle and that ego, really gets in the way, that can be tough.
Ego is a big problem, especially with guys. Girls as a whole, and of course I'm pigeonholing people as to certain things about them, but it's not in every case, but many guys are pride driven. I know I am.
Sure.
And so some of that is what gets us where we want to go, and some of that is what destroys what we want to build.
Absolutely. Yeah, we it's just people. If we get too focused on the image of what I'm supposed to be, that pride of like, no, but I have to be this student. I have to get this test score because this is how people see me. This is what I'm supposed to look like. I mean, if I get a B, what am I? If I'm not a straight A student, what am I now?
We all have something we identify with as to who we are.
Yes. Yeah, and what
falsely so.
Absolutely. And what we're trying to get them to identify as is I am a learner. I'm a learner. I'm someone who can go learn. And if I fail on the way, I learn from the failure. The failure is not the defining point of what happened here.
In fact, and I think I've heard it with some teachers actually doing this now, but in business world, those who, and all of us should be in business world. I grew up in business world and didn't get it. I got in student ministry and realized I'm in business world.
Right.
and that is that failure is an option. And failure is important. It's not whether you're going to fail, it's when you're going to fail, and how do I handle failure.
Yeah, it's absolutely necessary. I was actually, I'm reading a book right now by a guy named, I think, Chuck DeGroat, but he talks about baseball in that, in his appreciation
analogy
of baseball. He said, look, we celebrate the guy that hits safely 3 times out of 10. He's the hero 3 times out of 10. That means he fails 70% of the time.
Yes.
We mark our errors.
Yeah.
Because we understand that is a part of the game. You're going to mess up. You're not going to be successful most of the times up there. And that's a huge, character driving setting.
Don't intend to fail, but realize you're going to. Intend to learn from how I did it last time.
Yeah. You're always thinking, okay, here's what happened now. Next time I'm going to do this.
Those people who are not sports driven, I was absolutely a terrible athlete, but I loved athletics. Yeah. I could take punishment, so I loved training.
Right.
So I was in sports,
Yeah.
usually the punching bag, but I enjoyed the training. I love the physical dynamic of it. The great thing about sports, though, I'm a chaplain of a baseball team, have been for years, and I was involved with a lot of coaches, so I got to see these dynamics through student ministry. And so I got to be in the world without being in the world.
Yeah.
And that is that failure is what they build on. Everything's about failure. How do we go about teaching students that, or how do you go about teaching students that? You're doing that some in AVID, but do you see that across the board in education, or do you see a failure in teaching how to fail?
A failure and failure. I think there's a lot of dynamics that go on there. I think part of it is, we live in a time and a culture where everything has to look perfect. Most of these students, they're all on social media, and there's this kind of two-sided world that they live in. So I've got this picture perfect, pretty picture of me that I've taken 1,000 selfies, and I found just the right one, just the right filter, and boom, I put that out for everybody to see. Look how perfect I look right now.
Yeah.
And, our advertising and a lot of things, we go on and on about that, but we very much, I feel like, these kids are walking into a world where the message is constantly, you as you are not enough. You need this thing to make you better. You need this thing. You need to look perfect. You need to act perfect. I think we're failing at teaching failure because we're trying to pretend like it doesn't exist in some cases, in a very artificial way.
Let's go back to the church on that too, because I was listening to TED Talks. Do you like TED Talks?
I love TED Talks.
I
Absolutely.
love TED Talks too. And so I was looking up a particular guy though, and I thought, if anybody that's in ministry would be on TED Talks, it'll be this guy. And he was. His name's Rick Warren, Saddleback Church. And they used Rick several times because he's no longer, I think Andy Stanley actually has the largest church in America right now, but it's usually with Saddleback. And the one thing that, if you've heard Rick say this, was everybody pats us on the back because of all the wins that they see that we had. He said, but for every win, we have 99 failures.
Yeah.
When we get a win, we write a book about it, we put it out, and so everybody thinks that all we do is win.
Sure.
He said, no. He said, the church needs to be a laboratory, not a crystal palace, or he didn't say that, but something like that. But he did say laboratory is what we need to be. So what's your take on that for both church and school system?
If you just look at the very simple doctrine of humanity and doctrine of sin, we're broken. We find ourselves in a world that doesn't work for us. Often feels like it works against us. Our relationships experience that brokenness. We have to at some point start to embrace that we are incomplete. We do experience this brokenness. And yes, we have these goals. Like, this is how we should be striving to be. But we have to be also vulnerable and honest enough to be able to say, but this is where I am, right? So that when I'm walking around in church, right, it's not always, hey, good neighbor, how you doing? Oh, I'm great today. You're great today. Yeah, we're great today. And meanwhile, our marriage is in a tailspin,
right?
And all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think it just fundamentally comes back to this idea that I have to accept my brokenness, and the church has to accept that, yes, while we are called to a standard, and yes, while the Spirit of God is living in us, we are yet broken until we hit that place, of glorification later. And that, so our expectations have to be properly aligned.
And we have a tendency to do a better job of that and public school system and non-church environments and government environments. I mean, everything is out in the open. If you don't want to be out in the open, you shouldn't run for government because it's going to come out, whatever is good, bad, and ugly. Now it's going to be how strong are you to hold up under those dynamics. And we talked about the present president, whether you like him, love him, or hate him.
Sure.
And that is that the refreshing thing and the off-guard thing that just threw people off their guard was they say, well, what about this? And you've been this as many times. He says, absolutely, I have been all those things.
Right.
And you know what? I'm learning from that, and I'm trying to be a better person at XYZ. That was a refreshing dynamic because you don't hear that in politics. You're able to learn to talk around it,
everything,
even though it's coming out. And
Sure.
here's a guy that's going, absolutely, I did that. What an idiot.
Yeah, and I think go too far down that trail, but I think that was a big part of the appeal. Is that again, we live in a time where everything can feel kind of fake. Mm-hmm. We don't want it to be fake. We want to believe that we're these pretty perfect things, and you got a guy that got up there and just said, "Hey, here I am, messy as I am. Here I am," and I wonder if that wasn't part of the appeal. Like, but geez, at least he's being honest about it.
I can relate with this guy and all of his ivory palaces, which he has.
Sure.
He's as dirty as I am.
Sure.
And he's still making it.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about your family and tell me what happened with your dad. The thing that with your buddy's mom. Tell me the difficulty in your childhood.
Yeah.
With all those things, so people see how real you are.
Yeah. I mean, I don't remember. I don't remember a childhood without wondering about my dad's health. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can remember Christmas. I was in elementary school, young. My dad had just gotten out of the hospital from open heart surgery. He was 37, 38 years old when he had his first heart attack. I can remember one time we were at the bowling center on a Sunday morning, and all of a sudden people started giving me like quarters to go play video games. And, hey, do you want a soda? And I'm like, oh yeah, sure, cool. Why? And people were trying to keep me distracted, and what was happening was my dad was having a heart attack, and the EMTs had showed up, and they were trying to wheel him out of the bowling center, so that I wouldn't notice. Mm-hmm. So yeah, growing up, I mean, and it was in and out. There were mornings where I left the house wondering, okay, is Dad going to be there when I get back?
And I believe you said he's around another 20 years, something like that, right? Yeah,
geez, he held on. See, he had his first heart attack at like I said, 37, 38. And he was, he died about 2.5 years ago. Mm-hmm. So he was, I'm trying to do quick math in my head here. But late 50s, late 50s, early 60s.
And you, what was every day like? I mean, I won't say every day. But people who have gone through what you're going through relate with this. Students who may somewhere, because this is for youth workers, whether they're public school teachers or youth pastors or volunteers, but they all had backgrounds, and they may even use some of this for the students that they're dealing with. Once you get out of the hospital, kind of everything's okay. It's out of the back of your mind, and then the next thing that happened, so tell us what it really was like. That's not what it was like, but that's the way we tend to think of it. Okay, we've just heard Bryan's story. So, that happened, but hey, Dad was okay. He got 20 good years. Yeah,
I mean, it wasn't necessarily 20 good years.
Yeah.
Because it was 20 years with a question mark. Every day. I mean, because you just never knew when it was going to happen. Mm-hmm. So, yes, he's home from the hospital now. How many months till this happens again? I mean, there were numerous stints and things like that, and we'd be sitting there, and maybe it wasn't a heart attack, it was just a bad medical report when he got his blood work done.
Yeah.
For the end of his life, I mean, like I said, he'd been dealing with heart issues, and on top of all that, he ended up being diagnosed with leukemia. I say fortunately for him, because he never wanted any kind of long, drawn-out battle like that. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, it was a short fight. And really, the whole time he was in the hospital, it was about 2.5 weeks. Mm-hmm. He really didn't have many bad days. Yeah. He's on the treatment, and he's in pretty good spirits, and I'd go visit him, and we'd read some scripture together and go over things. And he had one bad day where his body just kind of shut down quickly. Mm-hmm. And then he was out. It's obviously anytime you lose a parent, it is heartbreaking. Mm-hmm. It's a colossal figure in your life. But at the same time, that I couldn't help but feel relieved for him. Mm-hmm. That he wasn't having to fight this constant battle with his body anymore.
And you know what? You didn't have to fight that battle with him anymore.
Sure.
And that sounds selfish. We don't want to talk that way. But
Sure.
in reality, I've dealt with enough of those things. And my own family's gone through that. I had a heart attack at 49. I'm absolutely in the best shape of my life now. Here's almost 20 years later, 10 years later.
Quick math.
Hopefully in another 30 years. But I'll be good. But and my wife went through cancer after that, and she's doing well. But the thing is, you go through those doubts, you go through those difficulties, and thinking in those dynamics. But and I've seen people go through the death of spouses and family and children and all that, and as horrible and hard as that is, there's a relief that says, okay, I can't deal with that. That's over. I can't help anymore. That's done now. I have to move to this next part of life.
Sure.
And part of that allows closure, allows you to go on. So tell me about the love of your life, and tell us some things that you would like to say to youth workers and youth pastors after that.
Well, we met at church. She came back home from college, and we got to talking. And I was initially, like, you stay over there. I'm in a career and stuff, and she was having nothing of that. And so that's when we got to know each other well, and went on a short mission trip with youth, and I really saw her heart for the Lord. Which for me, I spent quite a bit of time away from church and away from God. Was refreshing to see somebody who really engaged in her faith, and so that just resonated as being different to me. And there was just a trust there, in knowing kind of who she was and where she was going in life. And so we continued to get to know each other, got to know our each other's families, and it all just kind of, God's plan is God's plan, and He just carried us through.
Yeah, He has a tendency to show up with people in our life that He wants in our life right when we don't expect it to happen.
Absolutely. I was talking to a student about that yesterday. I was like, you're sitting here talking about like, oh, you want to get married at this point. No, maybe this guy. I'm like, listen, when it's time, someone will walk into your life. You never could have predicted it, never could have expected it, and boom, there it's going to be. And God's got a handle on those things. So, faith, you wait. And I just hope that you have the eyes to see and ears to hear when that person shows up.
That's right. And from this very school, salutatory in the year that she graduated, she is on one of our episodes. I can't remember if Amanda's on 17 or which one it is, but then her husband is on also, and they are two of those dynamic people in the world changers now.
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
Her thing was, I've got my life planned out, and I saw her in college. She went on a trip with us for a college trip as well. Ever since she was very, very young. And then she says, I'm going to marry this type of guy, and he's going to be this way, and I'm going to be this way, and all that. And none of that was true.
No.
And it all caught her, sideswiped her, and the story is an incredible love story and an incredible God story. But here we are in Umatilla where that story happened, and you're telling another student, which it's happening to students all over.
Sure.
But here we are, and we see a firsthand experience of your own life, but of this student that used to be here who, here's my life, this is what it's going to look like, and nobody's going to talk me out of it.
Yeah, we love to think that we have things planned out. I was speaking at baccalaureate last night. I told them that, like, my year subbing, I said I will never teach middle school. I hated substituting middle school.
Yeah.
And I've kind of become convinced that when we make those absolute statements, God kind of sits up there. He's like, okay, you'll never teach middle school. Check, here it comes. And I spent 6 years in a middle school classroom.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I'm not sure if that's it. That's probably part of it. Or it is, He's already decided.
Yeah.
And there's something in our spirit that says, I don't want what He wants, and I don't even know what that is, but there's something in here that says that might be it.
And it's scary.
I don't like that. Right.
That's so true.
Yeah. So we don't know the whole dynamics of how and where and why.
Sure.
We just know sometimes how it comes out. And then if you're like me in the middle of life, you're still going, gee, think next year is going to be this way, but I'm not so sure anymore.
Yeah.
Or next week.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, well, listen, Bryan, thank you so much for your time. The things that you're saying are things that people are wanting to hear. Some of them don't know they want to hear it yet.
Sure.
Some of them don't know they need to hear it yet. And some of them are dealing either in ministry world or parent world or volunteer world, and they've never even had a clue about the world that you just told us about.
Right.
And they need to know that world exists, even if they know public school. They don't know about AVID.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's a blessing. I think, if I had anything to throw out there or add that I've really learned and taken away is, look beyond the actions of any kid you're dealing with. Like, just always ask the question why. That's probably been what has made me successful in the classroom is just that patience to yes, I see that action that student just did is wrong and I'm going to correct them. But first I want to think, why did they do that? And then I want to get them to think, why did they do that? And really try to understand who they are. I'll tell you, when a kid knows that you care about knowing who they are, they're in. It might be a fight for a while, but they're in.
Absolutely. And part of it is a fight. And part of the fight is, do you care enough?
Yeah.
Or are you going to leave me like many other people have left me in my life or tossed me to the side?
Exactly.
I need to know that somebody's going to be stronger than me.
Absolutely.
Boundaries again.
Boundaries. That's it.
That's it. Bryan, thanks so much. Youth Worker Nation, this is what it's about finding out how you can continue on when you think that you can't go on any longer. Bryan, I think there's been one or two moments maybe in your teaching career you felt that way.
Certainly. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of us will. And so our purpose for this podcast is to say you can go on. There is life after chaos. There is life after pain.
Yes.
And we can, if we will hold on most of the time, we can go on to the next level.
That's it.
All right, Youth Worker Nation, we're out.